delighted to be able to introduce, and I'm going to read this because there's a lot of stuff to know, Dr. Baron Kelly, who is here joining us to talk about our production, or to talk about the play, Raisin in the Sun. He's not seen our production yet, so he'll be with those of you who are going up the hill to see it today. Dr. Baron Kelly is the Vilas Distinguished Professor of Theater and Drama at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He is a 4-time Fulbright Scholar, a former Harvard W.E.B. Du Bois faculty fellow. He is the author of An Actor's Task, Engaging the Senses, and co-author with Karen Kopryanski, Building Embodiment, Acting, Movement, and Voice Exercises to Illuminate Poetic Texts. We should have both of those. His teaching of acting has led him to teaching and lecturing residencies in more than a dozen countries on 5 continents. I didn't do an announcement. On 5 continents and in 20 American states, including London Central School of Speech and Drama, the Moscow Art Theatre, Beijing Central Academy of Drama, National Theatre School of Finland, National Theatre of Ghana, and the National Theatre School of Singapore. In 2022, he was inducted into the College of Fellows of the American Theatre at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. If you don't know how big a deal is, that's a very, very big deal for theater practitioners. It is a big deal. Broadway performances include Salome and Electra. International performances include the National Theatre of Great Britain, the National Theatre of Norway, Stratford Festival of Canada, Yermelova Theatre, Moscow, Russia, Edinburgh Theatre Festival, Constans Theatre, Spetsis, Greece. Did I get that right? Thank you. He has performed for over 30 of America's regional theaters in the United States, including the Guthrie, Yale Rep, Mark Taper Forum, South San Diego's Old Globe, Utah, Dallas, and Southern California Shakespeare festivals, among others. We'll have time for you to talk, but you have done a lot of things in your world. Television and film credits include Frasier, Law and Order, The Innocent Bird, and the upcoming indie feature, The Coming, among others. Now, that's more than enough out of me.
That's more than enough.
Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm grateful to join the audience to listen to you speak.
Now you're in full meeting.
Thank you. The university did a great job of putting that stuff together for me. I was talking with Jan, and my last name is Kelly. I think I'll start off by just telling a little story. I was doing a show in Dublin, Ireland, and one of the things that I had to do was go on the Mike Murphy show. So if you've ever been in Dublin, Mike Murphy was like Johnny Carson of RTV. And so we're on the radio, and Mike Murphy says to me, "So, Baron, how does a strapping young black chap like yourself get the last name of Kelly?" So I told him about, my great-grandfather and all of that and where this name comes from and all that stuff. That night at the theater, because I was doing, the show was about, there were 2 Americans and then an Irish actor was in this show. And I was playing a shell-shocked Vietnam vet who was out of his mind, and then there was the psychiatrist and all this. And so then at the end of the show, the stage manager knocks on the door and says, "Baron, there's some people here to see you." So I said, okay, maybe people saw the show and they just want to autograph or just chat and say hello. I come out of the stage door, there are about 10 people there with the crest of Kelly. Welcome, we heard you. Yeah. There are good and bad people all over this earth. I'm going to tell you that now. Those of you that have had a chance to travel, the world can be a beautiful place, and then, of course, just like anywhere else, you got a lot of negativity in the world. I'd like to thank Carey and Jake and APT for asking me here. This is a great treat. My original mentor, I'm going to veer away from this, but my original mentor, Randall Duk Kim, was the founder of this. I'm in touch with Randy. This is a magical place here. Right. So, A Raisin in the Sun. The title and its power to inform. Now, Carey's absolutely right. I haven't seen this production. I know the play. I've directed it. I've been in it. And so I'm very excited to see this interpretation of this play. So instead of me giving you a Wikipedia version of Lorraine Hansberry and all of that, I'm going to try to open up some stuff to sort of introduce you to either the external world of the play, what was happening outside, which then affects the inside of the play. And then I think you'll be able to view the play with a particular lens, right? So that's what you should do. So this is just going to inform some things. How many of you have seen the Sidney Poitier version of Raisin in the Sun? Anybody see the Puff Daddy version? That's all right. I met Mr. Poitier in California a couple of times, and it was a magical experience, and other people that were around him, you know, of course, had that image, among others, of what he had done in that play. And at the time that I met him, both times, he was sick, frail, but still able to charm a room and have that magic with him. So I'm going to honor him today by everything that I'm going to be saying, because he was a beautiful man. He was a beautiful man. Langston Hughes, A Dream Deferred. Langston Hughes, the poet, poses answers to the question as what happens to a dream deferred. The poem leaves the reader with the disturbing possibility that the unfulfilled dream may explode. In the broadest sense, this play is about human beings who the postponement of a long cherished hope or frustration, and how this can be dangerous. So it doesn't have to be just African Americans that deal with this, even though this play deals with a particular African American family at a particular time in this country. I think most people can understand the frustration that can happen behind a dream deferred. I mean, when August Wilson's plays started being done on Broadway and out in the regional theater, if you know who August Wilson is, you've seen productions here. I had so many different people come up to me and say, "Oh my God, that story is of my uncle. That reminds me of my family." And you know, people would have tears in their eyes talking about the family dynamic, even though that was generic to an African American family, particularly, or the story, particularly whatever century that particular play was. So, in the broadest universal sense, the effect of the outside world and how that affects the inside world. In the book of Proverbs in the Old Testament, I'm a former altar boy, but that isn't. In the book of Proverbs in the Old Testament, hope deferred maketh the heart sick. Within the general theme, Hansberry, she understood the painful disappointment suffered by African Americans since being brought to this continent in fetters. Dreams of personal fulfillment are thwarted by economic and social inequality, and that is still happening today. So I want to get away, as I said, from a Wikipedia type of pre-show lecture and maybe get into some other things that'll maybe open up this play a little bit. So you're going to see this play of a Chicago family divided by money and competing dreams about how to spend it. And now that's going to resonate on many different levels, particularly for Black America, because there are a lot of people still dealing with a lot of challenges in this country. Let me get my little thing here so I can stay on there. Yeah. So this play is just as relevant for the Black community today as when it opened. And in a historical context, Raisin debuted just a year before the great year of African independence. No fewer than 17 former colonies gained their independence. Now, there are two characters in this play. There's a character named Assegai, who's a Nigerian student, and there is one of the youngers, is Benitha. When I looked at this play again, actually, after a few years, that relationship sort of foreshadows another one of Barack Obama, who was born 2 years after this play debuted, and he was the son of an exchange student, and he married another African-American woman, Michelle Robinson, who is a native of Hansberry, Chicago. Like Assegai, Obama was fond of describing the march of history as a long arc, but one that inevitably bends towards justice, as Dr. King did at the height of the civil rights movement. Raisin is politically important in its time. 1959, 5 years after the landmark Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court school desegregation case. 4 years after the Montgomery bus boycott. 2 years after the showdown between the federal government and racial segregationists at Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. 4 years before the Great March in Washington, right, in 1963. And in 1959, when this play debuted, exactly when decolonized nations, African nations, were being born. The play poses questions in miniature about the costs of anti-Black racism and the small but crucial ways individual choices affected the large course of historical change. Raisin, at the core, is about hard choices, how money is invested or how money is thrown away, right? Now, Hansberry, I don't know how many of you know Native Son, the play Native Son by Richard Wright. Hansberry's doing a riff on Bigger Thomas. Bigger Thomas is an African-American youth who is trapped in a particular system, and he's the desperate protagonist of Wright's Native Son, the same way Walter Lee is in a particular situation in his life. In 1959, African Americans courageously chose dignity and resistance in the face of racism. That created a situation for the March on Washington. Hansberry was a role model for many successes of African American women since the 1960s. Still, African American women hold a majority of all African American enrollments in law, medical, and dental school today. African American families haven't had quite a happy ending that is hoped for in the play. Black ownership is still down. African Americans are still primarily renting, and that's because of generational wealth, of course. Black businesses are a fraction of what all these other US companies are. Yes, since 1959, Black upper middle class growth has set off this large percentage of Blacks that are still trapped in underfunded, dangerous schools. I grew up in such a situation in New York. Black and brown bodies are disproportionately represented in crowded prisons. These challenges are very real, and they are faced by many. I don't have to tell you, I mean, this is a primarily white state, and the majority of the jail population in this state are Black and brown bodies. This has been going on since I did my PhD here 20 years ago. I saw this happen in my old neighborhood in New York City. Particular wonderful guys who had tremendous athletic ability and everything else that were beaten down by the system. I even have a couple of people in my family that were in that situation. I mean, my father was a construction worker. My father got up every day that before the sun came up, before my siblings and I, would get up and get ready to go to school. My father worked with first generation Irish, Italian, German. These guys were brothers. But these men didn't go to college. But what they instilled in us, and I'm still in touch with the kids of some of these men, they instilled in us a particular work ethic and instilled in us a particular way to keep marching forward in the face of any defeats that we may have had and still have, Too many children today are still doing their best today to dream in schools that are legally but not actually integrated. This is happening in New York. When I was in school in New York, it was a completely different thing. But now, because of zoning and these particular performing arts schools and these higher performing schools, it's amazing. In 1947, well, Raisin was never a play about integration. It's about getting out of a trapped, claustrophobic situation of lives. And this struggle, is it still one today? After you see the production here, then you think about it. Because you're gonna, I mean, you watch the news, you read, so see what happens in this production. And I'm very excited to see this. In 1947, there was another play called Whitman Avenue. The actor Canada Lee, I don't know how many of you remember or know who he was. He was a tremendous actor, tremendous advocate. He was along with Paul Robeson and Langston Hughes and all of these other great activists. And Canada Lee actually played Bigger Thomas in Native Son. But he played in a play called On Whitman Avenue about a black family that moves into a middle class neighborhood. And that was written by a white female playwright named Maxine Wood. There was another play in 1953, Take a Giant Step, about a black family that moves into a white community. You can probably find the movie somewhere online. I know it pops up sometimes, maybe on TCM or something. Alice Childress is another playwright who I got a chance to know when I was in New York, when I was a kid, working with her and Morgan Freeman and others on another play of hers. She was the first African-American female playwright to be produced on, or maybe to be produced on Broadway, almost, but she refused to change the ending. There was a mounting of Trouble in Mind just recently, within the past year and a half, on Broadway. Now, with Raisin, it was timing. It was timing, really. Because no white producers wanted to put money into the show, because they didn't think it was going to make any money, right? When the show started to tour in New Haven, in Boston, it was like all of a sudden, white folks were saying, the veil had been lifted. This is how black people talked when white folks weren't around, right? Many producers wouldn't invest money in this play. Only about 10% of the audience at the time was black, right? So if you have that small percentage, how's the play really going to make money? So the play was really written for a white audience, right? The play could not have survived with just a black audience. And Raisin is no more dated today than Death of a Salesman, right? There's something unique about the treatment of black femininity in Raisin as well, and watch this play, because that's an under-recognized part of its genius. I'm sure women far outnumbered the theater-going audiences, white and black, at this period. So I'm sure there was some kind of alchemy of identification, right? As I keep harping on, it's impossible to disconnect the dysfunction of the outside world from the connections in the home. What actors will do a lot, when they're working on roles and when they're rehearsing, there are connections and there are circumstances that affect the actor, the external world of the play, and in the internal world of the play. And if you can start to create that tension, then a particular life starts to happen. That happens in Shakespeare, it happens in all plays, really, right? So it's the imagination of what happens. Now, Hansberry, that's all right. Hansberry was a visionary. She died young at 34 in 1965. So that's basically a short career of 5 years. She was diagnosed with cancer 2 years before she died. Now, my question is, as a scholar, is what else could she have been thinking about at that time? The tragedy for me is that her future work was going to cover so much. What was her aesthetic project in the long run? Now, she had other plays that had been produced, Les Blancs, her husband or her ex-husband by the time she passed away, The Sign in Sidney Brustein's Window, To Be Young, Gifted, and Black, which is culled and adapted from her writings, The Drinking Gourd. But here was a person who only had 5 years, like a phoenix, with what she was producing. And what the hell what else could have happened? Jan, don't do that. She's gonna become like my mom. Yeah, it would gonna become like my mommy. Okay, my auntie. Right. Now also, Hansberry was very politically savvy. She was in strong support of racial and gender equality. Those of you that have been privy to particular documentaries recently, it has come out, but most people know that she led a closeted sort of lesbian life. That's okay. This play centered around particular experiences that she had as a young girl when her family moved into a hostile neighborhood in an all-white building in 1938. I'm sure all of this was in her mind when she created the younger family. She's spoken a little bit about this in these documentaries that I've seen. Her family's interest ranged from politics to literature. Her father knew W.E.B. Du Bois, Langston Hughes, Paul Robeson. Her father was what would have been termed at that time a race man, if you've never heard that term. These were people that were about lifting the race. As W.E.B. Du Bois used to say about the talented 10th, it's the responsibility of the 10% of those that are moving up to pull the others up so that they can come up into these prominent positions. So her father was one of these men. Also, I don't know how many of you know this, but I've seen it in California, or I've seen on my friends' deeds in California. My house is in California, by the way. It's paid off. Yay! On my deed, there's a covenant. Do you know what covenant laws were? Oh, yeah. I don't know how many of those existed up here in Wisconsin, but covenant laws existed in the United States. And certainly I saw it on my deed. I've seen it on other friends' old deeds. You know, we collect all that stuff. And so her father fought the government, went to court, because those white folks wanted them out of that building. And Lorraine Hansberry even talks about, you know, don't stand, our mother would say, don't stand by the window, and actually a rock or brick came through the window and it almost hit her, could have knocked her head off. But anyway, so she had all of this experience in her. People say that she went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She did for about 5 semesters. She lived off campus. She came to the University of Wisconsin in 1948. The dorms were segregated, right? Right? But there were young women from across the United States and overseas who were drawn to the theater, politically active, African history and culture, anti-colonialist leaders like Jomo Kenyatta and Kwame Nkrumah, you know, 1950. So she left after about 5 semesters, right? That's, what is that, 2.5 years or so. But New York resonated with her. So one of her father's friends, Paul Robeson, had a newspaper called Freedom Magazine. And she went to work for Paul Robeson's magazine. She had international exposure to others who had political awareness through Paul Robeson. On a side note, I'm an old movie buff. My grandmother used to sit me in front of the television set and talk about all these actors like Cary Grant and all these people. You know, Frederick March has gotten a bad, I don't know how many of you know this, a few years ago, he got a bad rap at the University of Wisconsin because people said he was part of the KKK when he was at the University of Wisconsin. Now, you can't fault a stupid young kid who maybe got into the mix of, but let me just tell you from what I know about him, he grew up in Raisin. From what I've read about him and what I know about him, he totally was not a member of the KKK. What he did as far as anti-racism work in the 1940s with Paul Robeson and other people like Freddie Washington and speaking at these rallies? You know, so I just had to say that for a moment, you know, even though when Hansberry was at the university, you know, it was a segregated, you know, environment for her, she still survived. And so I can just think of what that environment was like when she was working for Robeson's Freedom magazine. Yes, there are harsher messages about race and class, and sometimes these harsher messages are difficult for white establishment to accept, actually, right? So you can just imagine producers ask why a poor black family living on Chicago's South Side could be of any interest to a predominantly white Broadway audience. Brooks Atkinson, the dean of the New York critics, what he said, the outer and inner truth about a black family in the South Side of Chicago at the present time. Now that's what the dean of the New York Drama Critics was saying about this play at the time. You know, you can go on Wikipedia and see things where people were saying that all rungs of black society were coming to see this play, hairdressers, doctors, numbers runners. I don't know if you know what numbers runners were. What do we have today? Lotto, right? No. It's all legalized. I remember going with my mother. I shouldn't tell you this. I remember going with my mother. My mother would hold my hand and my brother's hand, and she'd go into a building in Harlem, and there'd be a guy, and I didn't know who this guy was, and my mother would say, stay here with your brother, and, you know, okay, in the African-American community, you know, a lot of people would play numbers, and a lot of people had books where they would dream these numbers and all that stuff. My mother was one of those people. Now, for some reason, as I got older, I said, now, how come we didn't move to a mansion? So I don't know how much money. But you know, okay. So since 1959, there have been productions of this play all over the world, believe it or not, in China, Eastern Europe. Now, here's a side note that you probably won't get on Wikipedia, because I had written about this. The man that I wrote my dissertation about was Earl Hyman. He played Bill Cosby's father on The Cosby Show. I can speak Norwegian, folks, because when I came up to the University of Wisconsin, the reason I came up here, I needed to go to one of the top Scandinavian programs in the country, along with the theater PhD program at that time. And Earl played Bill Cosby's father on The Cosby Show, so while I was here, I was inducted into the Sons of Norway. Oh yeah, I was inducted into the Sons of Norway, so I would get up and do my little speeches, and a little side note, when I went over on my first Fulbright to Norway, you know, the Fulbright board marches all of the people out to talk about what their research is. So the scientists would get up and say, well, I'm doing this about global warming and all that stuff, and there's a muted applause. I got up and I said, I'll do it in Norwegian, I'll tell you what I'm saying. I got up and I said, jeg skriver om skuespilleren Earl Hyman. A certain generation of people, they knew who Earl was. So anyway, so Earl Hyman, who played Bill Cosby's father on The Cosby Show, played Walter Lee in the London production of A Raisin in the Sun when they took it over. But the play was not a success because in London at that time, there were Teddy Boy riots. Do you know what the Teddy Boy riots were? Those were riots of these kids who were affecting this Edwardian dress, and they were slicking their hair back, and they were upset because the West Indian immigrants and all this other stuff was happening in London. So there were major riots, and you know, people were uncomfortable. So the people that were going to the play, and the air conditioning wasn't what it is now, they didn't understand the play. So it was not a success. And I talked to Lloyd Richards about this. Lloyd Richards was a great man who was the dean at the Yale School of Drama, African American. It's beside the point, but yeah. And so I still think that Well, here's another side note, because I love old movies. Harry Cohen, who is the head of Columbia Pictures, the film mogul, like Louis B. Mayer and all that, so Harry Cohen was in charge of Columbia Pictures. He said the only way that we're going to do this play to make it palatable, certainly for a Southern audience or whatever, if they're going to cut it, was to shorten the original play, right? But the movie was still powerful enough to garner particular awards at the Cannes Film Festival and all that. You know, Harry Cohen was a SOB. I mean, you know, when he died, you know who Betty Davis was? And that's it. And then I'm going to leave because my students love this when I start talking. When Harry Cohen died, he was hated in Hollywood. And so at his funeral, his funeral was at a Jewish temple on Wilshire Boulevard in California. And so Betty Davis, they interviewed Betty Davis when everybody was coming out of the temple. And they said, Miss Davis, how do you feel about the death of Harry Cohen? And look at all these people that have come to pay their respects. And so if you know Betty Davis, they came to see if he was dead. So anyway, I think I'll end it there. I think you're gonna be looking at the play in a different sort of light, and it's a pleasure to meet all of you and see all you guys here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I don't want you to stop talking ever. I like all these cul-de-sacs. I want whole journeys on. So I'm grateful. I'd love to just spend the last couple of minutes, if it's all right with you, to open up to questions. I'm going to repeat, as opposed to passing the mic around, if you want to raise your hand, I'll repeat the question so all of us can hear it. Sir.
Can you riff on a more recent play, Fences? And this play. Could you talk about that just a little bit?
Question about fences.
Sorry.
Just
Well, first of all, you know, the dynamic is a little bit different because, you know, the father figure, that family is intact now. Troy may have his flaws. Mr. Younger, the only presence of Mr. Younger, again, the only presence of Mr. Younger in the play is from a picture that's been hung in the family room. And with Troy, he has a particular kind of, the male lead in Fences, has a particular dynamic with his son because he'd been through a lot of hurt and a lot of disappointment. The dynamic between Mama in Lena Younger and Walter Lee is completely different because then Lena I don't want to give it away because if you've never seen the play, something happens where Mama does something for her son. You know what I mean? Because she says, you go right ahead and you be a man and do what you have. Troy is stopping his son from doing what he wants to do. You know what I'm saying? And so two different dynamics because Troy in Fences, you know, had a lot of hurt and disappointment because he was in the Negro Leagues and he couldn't do whatever he wanted to do and, you know, all that sort of stuff. But that's basically it. You still see the love in Fences, though. You still see the love of the family. You still see the love. You know, there's just a different dynamic. Just a different dynamic. Just a different story.
Thank you. Right here.
It makes a lot of sense that the play was written, as you said, for a white audience. Could you speculate on how it might have been a little different if she had been able to write it for a black audience?
Well, I don't think it would have been a tremendous success as it was because there weren't a lot of plays that were being produced. They were musicals, but, you know, legitimate drama. You know, I mean, we're talking about, in the 1940s, I mean, the roles that were available for black actors, you know, black people were still considered second-class citizens in this country and all of that sort of stuff, you know? And so whatever the little, and here with Alice Childress and all of these other writers, when they were doing successful plays off Broadway, these people were labeled as communists. Anything that dealt with integration and the mixing of the races, that was considered, no, we can't do that. So, it certainly wouldn't have been as big success, that's clear. But still, today, I mean, the play's done in black communities and stuff, and people say, oh yeah, right, yeah, from my standpoint of view, I think. Yeah.
This gentleman over here.
Oh, yeah. On this topic, could you say a little bit about Trouble in Mind? I just saw it at the Utah Shakespeare Festival.
Oh, you did?
Oh, I did too.
Yeah, I saw it on Broadway because one of my mentors, she was the lighting designer for it, so I wanted to see it. I mean, she was a very powerful, important writer, but she battled. God bless her. She stuck to her guns and didn't want to change the ending, and this is all written about, to make it palatable for a white audience. And so, again, you just have to look at the forces that were against people to do things. I mean, I think the story is interesting. You have these black actors, right? You have a white director who's trying to say, well, this is how you maybe should think about acting this role and all of that. When I was a kid auditioning for commercials and stuff, I used to hear directors say, you know what, Baron, that's great. Can you be a little bit more like Eddie Murphy? And I was like, or, hey Baron, can you be a little bit more black? Yeah, but that's it, man. And I go, what do you mean? I mean, I heard Morgan say once, I don't play black. You know what I mean? I mean, you know what I mean. But I mean, still.
Well, one of the questions in Trouble in Mind is, how should I play black? And then the lead woman is the one who takes us down.
Who takes us? Well, that takes guts, and I'm sure that was a part of Childress. Yeah, her experience. I mean, listen, 20, 30 years ago, you have all these different directors directing things today, right? Just because you see me, I'm a black man. That's a part of who I am, but that doesn't define who I am. Because you can do many different things, you know what I mean? And that's the thing that is happening, well, back then for sure. Because people were just getting into more race consciousness back then, you know what I mean? Today, it's happening in a different sort of, it's happening in a different sort of fashion, as we've seen over the past 2 or 3 years and such like that. You know what I mean? But I've gotten into many different arguments with people, racialized politics. I think what happens with racial representation as opposed to the individual. Why do you think most of this country, or half of this country, hated Barack Obama? I mean, yeah, come on, just for nothing other than the fact of what he represented. Because people were going around saying, you mean to tell me Joe could be my boss one day?
I saw the production of The Brothers' Size yesterday. You know that play, I'm sure.
Yeah, I've seen it. I saw a production at the Actors Theatre.
Oh yeah, well, it was gut-wrenching up here. It was so amazing. Maybe you could say a little bit about it?
No, I don't. No.
If you haven't seen it, you definitely must.
It's a good production.
Yeah.
I'm proud of that production.
Gavin directed it.
Gavin Lawrence, who's playing Walter Lee today. If you're seeing the show, Gavin directed The Brothers' Size. So if you haven't seen it,
Is it in the round?
it is 3/4 thrust, but inside.
Okay.
So yeah, come, I'll get you tickets for that.
Okay.
Anybody have another question for Dr. Kelly? I'm so great. Oh, one more. We got one more. Make it a good one. You're the last one.
No pressure.
Give an opinion on what your thoughts are on the Gershwin production and how they portray blacks and Portuguese.
You're talking about?
Or you don't want to say?
No.
What's the question?
The question was about Porgy and Bess. Did Dr. Kelly have any thoughts on that play?
Well, first of all, opera singers or black opera singers love the music, okay? Because there's a challenge to be able to play that music. I mean, to be able to sing that music. Catfish Row and all of that. Now, there are many different ways that that's been done. So everybody that lives in the inner city is not downtrodden, first of all. You know what I mean? Everybody's not, you know, downtrodden. You got a couple of people like Sport and Life and all that. This is from a personal experience. The first best was a woman that I got to know in Norway, and she lived in Norway. She's passed about. Oh wait, no, her name was Anne Brown. She was the original Bess in Portland Bess. She'd been living in Norway since 1947 or 48, and she told me that experience of what that was like, going to audition for Gershwin. I guess he lived in Central Park West, if you know New York, and she was at Juilliard at the time. And she came up and she auditioned, and he heard her voice, and then he started playing more things, and he said, here, play this and sing this and blah, 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 blah. She didn't think anything of those characters. We're talking about late 1930s, early 40s, right, to get the dates in my head. Here they are on stage in Washington, D.C. at the National Theatre, and she told the producers that I'm not going to play on this stage unless this audience is integrated. And she took a stand, and she had other actors in that production say, we're not going on unless this audience is integrated. The National Theatre in Washington was segregated. I don't have a problem with the show. I may have had a problem the way Otto Preminger did the movie with Dorothy Dandridge. I mean, she was Sidney Poitier and all that sort of stuff, but you know, I don't have a problem with that. And I haven't heard any African-American operatic singers have problems with that. Bess is a great role. It's a great role.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cannon.
I'll say something in Norwegian again. There are probably some Norwegians here, right? I'm sure. You got any Norwegian roots? Okay. Okay. Tusen takk. That's 1,000 thanks. Tusen takk. Bare hyggelig å møte deg. It's a pleasure to meet you. Okay. Ha det bra. Have a good day.